Hello and welcome everybody to the Pokerfuse podcast. It's September 19th, 2019. This is episode number 28. I'm your host, Mike Gentili, along with my co-host, Nick Jones. Today on the podcast, PokerStars has announced that the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure will not be returning to the Bahamas in 2020. Run It Once Poker has announced that it will be adding Sit Gos before the end of the year, and it strives to be a top online poker platform. According to Morgan Stanley, poker bots are a big problem for online poker operators.
PokerStars has decided that the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure, the PCA, will not be returning in January 2020. This announcement came late last week, just a couple of weeks after they announced that the PSPC would be returning next year, but not in the Caribbean, but in Barcelona.
Yeah, that was I can't say it was a big surprise for everybody. I know that there's been a lot of pushback from players in recent years about looking to perhaps get away from the Atlantis in the Bahamas. But it was quite an interesting... The timing of the announcement was quite interesting, coming just on the heels of the natural disaster that occurred down there. And I know that some had speculated that perhaps they could have handled that better, but it was difficult when the circumstances brought themselves together, such as the announcement of the PSPC. The timing was actually running short on when they would have to announce the PCA returning to the Bahamas if it were to do so. And I believe that it came out in an interview that was unrelated to the PSPC, so it wasn't something that... It didn't seem like it was something that PokerStars actively pushed out as an announcement to happen right after the hurricane.
Yeah, it seemed a bit unfortunate in the sense of, I know I was researching for an article about the Bahamas and just the situation there and the relief efforts there. And the first article I read was, I think, the Wall Street Journal, and the article started, the first paragraph, it was with an interview with the owner of the Atlantis Resort, saying what we need is tourism to still come here. We need to get the message out that large parts of the Bahamas are completely fine. So, I think it was unfortunate timing. Obviously, I think PokerStars have been planning this for a while. I don't think the decision was made in any way related to what happened there. If anything, it's kind of surprising that this wasn't announced like a year ago. In an ideal world, they would have announced this ahead of the last PCA to say, this is our last one ever. We're going to go out on a high with the PSPC, and really drum up excitement for it, rather than, obviously they decided, let's announce the PSPC first and then we'll announce it afterwards, which is an odd PR decision, I guess. But obviously I think they wanted to let the PSPC shine on its own for a while. I don't think many lament the loss of the PCA in the Bahamas. So it's been going for 15 years there now. People have perhaps got a little bit tired of the resort and looking for something new. I found it interesting that the statement that PokerStars issued us did not say that they were retiring the PCA brand. They just said the PCA wouldn't return in the Atlantis next year. So it leaves open the possibility for it to go somewhere else in the Caribbean, or ultimately to return back to that resort, in another year. It just wouldn't be there in January 2020.
Yeah, so, you make a good point there that had they known prior to last year's PCA that they probably would have played it up big to try and get as much bang for their buck as they could. But it's likely that the decision not to go back to the Atlantis came after last year's PCA. Now, how they handled that with the announcement of this year's PSPC, hindsight, it's easy to look back and say that they could have done a better job with that. But all in all, here's a question that I have for you, Nick. I saw that that Party Poker was doing some charitable work in the Bahamas, and they do have an event coming up later this year still on the islands. And I was wondering, have PokerStars announced anything in that regard?
Yeah, so with the Party Poker one, yeah, they're still their Caribbean Poker Party, the CPP, kind of their PCA equivalent, really, which was in the Dominican Republic for 2 years, and last year for the first time went to a new resort called Bahamas, which is in on the same island in near Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas. And they're going back there this year, and they will be back there in 2 months' time. I think it's mid-November they visit. So, you know, that event is still there, and they are running a couple of things to raise money for the relief efforts there. So one is they just have a Just Giving page up where people can donate to Red Cross efforts, and I think they're running a Twitter campaign that if you donate and retweet, then you enter into a lottery to win, I think, a $6,000 package to the CPP. So that's a fairly small thing, but just a way that people can donate and maybe enter into a prize draw. But a bigger thing they're doing is they're running a pretty cool charity tournament. It's an online tournament. It's $100 to enter. It allows re-entries, and 100% of the money goes to, I think it's the Red Cross efforts, or at least some charitable efforts, to help with the relief efforts of the hurricane. And the prize money for that, they're putting up multiple packages to the Caribbean Poker Party. So they are putting up, I think, 3 like $15,000 to $20,000 packages and a few more $6,000 packages. So I think the total prize money is close to $100,000 across those two promotions. I think maybe $80,000 or $90,000. So that's a pretty nice incentive that Party Poker have given for players if they want to be donating money to the effort. So that's good to see.
Yeah, it sounds like they're doing quite a lot to get players down there.
Yeah, so on the PokerStars front, we heard nothing from them. We saw nothing come out of them. And we've seen PokerStars in the past. They've run, for perhaps larger humanitarian crises, they've ran like charity tournaments where basically it's a way of donating. You enter the tournament, and I think it's like kind of just a donation system. And they used to do that. I think they've done it a bit less recently. But something that we saw is they do have in the PokerStars New Jersey client, there is a link to I can't remember the charity off the top of my head, but again, a charity page. So that's there. We haven't seen whether there's any kind of additional incentive or match promise from PokerStars or anything like that. So from what we could see right now, and all we heard back from PokerStars was that they were kind of promoting this links if people wanted to donate. But that's all we've seen from PokerStars at the moment, or from anyone else. Party Poker definitely seemed to be leading the charge there with the charitable drive.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of effort behind a charity drive of their own could have helped neutralize some of the questionable PR that came from the announcement that they wouldn't be back in 2020. But they, as you mentioned, there is a link in the New Jersey client that is promoted to players there, so that they can give, and who knows, maybe they have something else planned coming up, and it just hasn't been announced yet.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think PokerStars have currently just got their handful with everything they're trying to do with the PSPC and Platinum Passes. We won't get into too much details here, otherwise this segment's going to be really, really long. I think it's going to be coming out in the next day or two, a really nice long article on Pokerfuse detailing all the ways that you can win a Platinum Pass in the next couple of months. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah. So that's going to be coming out on Friday. Not sure when everyone will be listening to this podcast, but it will have detailed information on how and where people can get more information about winning a Platinum Pass.
Yeah, definitely check that out. But it's putting it together, putting that information. We've got a similar article on Pro with a slightly more industry bent to it. If you're a subscriber, definitely check that out, detailing kind of all the methods they're doing. There's just a lot, and piecing it all together took a while. Like PokerStars haven't made it easy yet to work out everything they're doing, and I feel maybe there's a lot going on. We counted 6 different live events over the next 2 to 3 months where a Platinum Pass will be given away in some format. Being that we're a year out till the tournament, they have really kicked things off into a high gear. They're running these Megapass satellites, which again feel very under promoted to me because they're very interesting You can't. It's a 4-step satellite system. You have to start pretty early on if you want to end up at the end. They're giving away a platinum pass every week for the next, I think, 2 to 3 months. So they've got loads going on. I feel like they may still be trying to play catch up with their own kind of efforts, because there's just a lot of activity.
And I promise we won't get too deep into PSPC, not to extend this segment, but I did want to ask your opinion on something. It seems to me like there's maybe a stronger effort this year to get platinum passes in the hands of more recreational players. I know last year they were putting these platinum passes on the top of a lot of live events, giving them to the winner, which would have the effect of making the player pool for the PSPC more skilled, I guess, than if they gave them away randomly. This year it seems to be a bit different. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it absolutely seems to be the case. I mean, it's pretty early days, so we don't want to draw too many conclusions. And honestly, I can't remember the first month of Platinum Pass promotions they did in the year-long drive. But what we're seeing at the moment, a good example, again, something we just wrote on Pro Today, was... so last year, perhaps most famously, Ramon Collias, who won the PSPC, he won his Platinum Pass, and he won it through the CEP. It's something we talked about, I think, a couple of podcasts ago, this local Spanish tour. And he won the leaderboard across the whole event. So I think he shipped one tournament, final table 2 others. He got the most points. So at the end of the year, he won this leaderboard. Obviously, you have to be a very skilled player to do that. And the prize at the top was the Platinum Pass. This year, they haven't said that's going to be the prize for the leaderboard. It very well could be. But what they have said is that the next 2 stops that they've got this year, in 2 fairly small cities in Spain, that they will just do a random prize draw. Any online entrant who satellites their way to the live event, on day 2 they will have a draw and someone will win a Platinum Pass. Yeah, and so that's... they did a bit of that, absolutely, the first time around, but almost every Platinum Pass given away so far, and I think we're over 15, has had a heavy dose of random factor to it. So yeah, I mean, 100% it seems like... So W Coup's another example. I'm pretty sure last year the leaderboard winner and the main event winners won Platinum Passes. And again, they could do that this year, but so far they've made no mention. There's been no connection between W Coupe and Platinum Pass at all. And the only online methods we've seen so far is just completely random in Stars Rewards chests, and this new Mega Pass system, which is obviously skill based, but it's very casual player focused. Again, it's encouraging people to basically start their path either for free or through like $2 spin and goes, I think. So yeah, really the first month has been very casual player focused. I think they're looking to get those stories from recreational players, average Joe moneymaker type people. And I think maybe the one downside of the Callias win, fantastic story, but it did turn out that he was a very, very good poker player.
Right,
and although he wasn't a professional, he won both of the 2 big Spanish tours that year. He won the leaderboards on both of them. So didn't quite hit the moneymaker, average Joe type story. So maybe they're just doubling down on it this year.
Yeah, it'll be curious to see players' reactions in the forums and throughout the community, just to see what they think of this change, or at least what appears to be a change in strategy with the Platinum Passes for the PSPC. Because on one hand, they're going to be probably upset that they're not having the chance to win these Platinum Passes that they had last time. But on the other hand, it should make the field quite a bit softer.
Yeah, I think it should. And obviously that's what PokerStars are going for. They have said, although they're not going to say how many Platinum Passes they'll give away, they want it to be bigger and better. And I think the way to do that is to really highlight how many of these passes are getting put in the hands of hopefuls, which will hopefully obviously drive the professional players to... A lot of them will be coming to EPT Barcelona anyway. Still a huge stop for the main event for the high rollers, to get them playing the 25k event. I think the only other interesting aspect is going back to the PCA and the end of that is it just leaving a hole in the calendar for an event that was quite unique in what is now quite a limited scope for PokerStars live stops. The EPT this year was an event 2 events in Sochi, an event in Madrid, Barcelona, and we'll have Prague in December, and I guess there was Monte Carlo.
Did I, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought that I saw something where the Aussie Millions was moving into January this year. Is that correct? Do you know?
Could be.
Yeah, I'm not sure, so definitely don't quote me on that one. But yeah, you're right. It's that beginning of the year, they really didn't have a lot of competition there. And it will be interesting to see if someone steps up to try and fill that spot in the calendar if it hasn't been already.
Yeah, I mean, it's both a spot in the calendar, but it's also just, I feel like the type of event that PokerStars have, it was very much, it felt like the event where they would invite a lot of media to. I think a lot of their staff would go to. I think it probably had quite a lot of just kind of corporate benefits. Like it was a cool place that people could go. It was a good place to try and bring mainstream media to go like, look at this kind of fairy tale stuff that we do. Look at these stories that we tell, that kind of thing. And so, they lose that a bit. I think like Monte Carlo is something that, they've never done in that way. My impression, where that was. PCA was very much the event where they would try and get, I think, some broader coverage of, and really get like there was a branding exercise involved with it. And I wonder if maybe the PSPC is just that now, so it's going to be Barcelona in 2020. But as it was always that permanent fixture in January where a lot of players would go and meet, a lot of the media would go and meet, and it would just be the start of the year would kick off with 2 weeks of like PokerStars in the sun. And it's gonna be a hole there, and I wonder if they look to replace it. All their signs point to just European focused now. Like we're not seeing the Moneymaker Tour in the US. From everything that we know, everything's going to be European focused in their key markets: Russia, Spain, and France. Now, the UK, and yeah. So I mean, maybe I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw like an EPT London, which. It's kind of surprising they don't have really. They only have like the festival stops there, so I imagine we'll kind of see that, but not in January. That would be horrific.
Yeah, well, who knows? As noted, the actual PCA brand has not been retired, so perhaps we will see it reemerge somewhere else in the Caribbean in the near future. While not the biggest online poker site in the industry, and quite frankly far from it, Run It Once Poker has its sights set on becoming number one. We recently published an article on Pokerfuse that quoted Phil Galfond on Dat Poker Podcast with Adam Schwartz, Daniel Negreanu, Terrence Chan, and Ross Henry, saying that he thinks with a little bit of effort, Run It Once Poker could be the number one poker site in the industry. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
That is a big goal that I know Party Poker, I think Patrick Leonard said that 3 years ago. He said if in a year's time we're not number one, I'll be disappointed. So they missed that mark. I wouldn't be surprised if like when Unibet came along, they had high hopes. I think, I don't know. I mean, there's no harm in setting your sights high. I think people often underestimate the huge funnel that PokerStars have in driving new customers constantly to their brands that developing takes years and years of skill and brand equity that is, I think, almost insurmountable. But do I think there's huge scope for them to 10x in size? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and Phil had said that in, I believe it was like that they were just one or two updates or one or two features away from becoming a top 2 or 3 site. And now that I think about it, maybe that was on his blog post and not on the podcast. I forgot. I could be mixing those two up. Yeah.
When you say 1 or 2 updates away from being a top 2 or 3 online poker site, was that a top, like their software will be amongst the top 2 or 3? Or is it literally in terms of traffic? Because something in the back of my head says I read something like that on the blog, and it was like he was saying that their software would be amongst the best within a couple of updates. Oh,
yep, you're right here. I got the quote in front of me. It says, in quotes, "I feel like we are 1 or 2 updates away from a clear top 2 or 3 poker platform experience. And I think that a year from now, we have a good chance of being number one."
So I'm not sure if I disagree with that, really. I mean, the updates, but they're just huge. The updates they've got, to me, seem as big as everything they've done so far. They are having both sit and goes and tournaments. We can lump them into one update if they can do it in one. And having a mobile client. And, you know, they're both huge things. Then you could add on to that probably some other games, although, you know, I'm not so sure. Like, maybe they need some kind of either Zoom or Lottery Sit and Go product or something else. But yeah, I mean, there are 2 or 3 updates where they're just massive updates.
Yeah, and so I think that the term platform experience could be debated exactly what is meant by that, but I think that 2 or 3 is quite ambitious as far as updates go. What we did find out, and I had mixed up my sources there, was that on Dat Poker Podcast, Phil did say that they would likely be having sit and goes by the end of the year, but MTTs were still going to be a way off. And you know, right there's 2 updates, and for as good of experience as it is playing on Run It Once Poker, they still do have some work to do. You know, as you mentioned, a fast fold product, for example, would go a long way to getting their platform up to par with the others that are leading the industry. And regardless of the software itself, you still need the liquidity to have the real important experience. And that's something I know that they're working on. Phil is now playing on the site himself. I think we talked about that recently on the pod. And he's also streaming a lot more, even streaming games that are not on Run It Once Poker. So he's doing a bit of work to try and raise his public-facing image back up to perhaps where it was prior to embarking on this venture. But those marketing efforts are going to hopefully pay off for the site when it comes to traffic and getting the liquidity for the games that they need.
Yeah, I mean, and I hope that they get to the point that at least the concept can be properly tested, because I feel like until they have a mobile client and until they have tournaments, then we can't really say whether many of the things they've done are successful or not. I think the difficulty will be is that one thing is having that. I mean, sit and goes and MTTs have an even bigger problem in terms of liquidity. You know, you can't just slap on, you know, €1,000 guaranteed tournament and expect it to fill because you've posted that number up there. You need, I mean, it's going to help, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of marketing, in terms of getting the message out there organically about what's available. But it's not like all of a sudden they can have like 6-figure guaranteed MTTs. You know, they will just not have the budget for taking the overlays. You know, we see with Party Poker, like, I think it may have been back in the day, you could, you know, if you had announced it early enough, then people would find out about big overlays and fill the space to the point that there wasn't much of an overlay. Party Poker runs with like 15 to 20% overlays. You know, we've seen in PowerFest, I think the first day they had like $250,000 of overlays. You know, some tournaments missing by 6 figures. Like, it can happen. It's not like the money is out there and it will come to you if you just post it. So that's a long way of saying that step 1 is obviously offering it, but then step 2, they will have a real challenge, you know, filling sit and go so they actually run. No one wants to sit and wait for a sit and go to pop and 45 minutes later it still hasn't. You know, it's but I hope they get to the point where they can at least find out whether they can do it or not, you know.
Yeah, you know, as far as marketing goes as well, and by the way, full disclosure, Pokerfuse has entered an affiliate agreement with Run It Once Poker. So we do have that. I just wanted to let everyone know that. We're not trying to pretend like we're anything but. But as far as marketing goes, they're doing something else that I think could boost their exposure quite a bit. I heard.
Can I guess what it is?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it marketing with us? Is it having an ability to do it with us?
I do think that marketing it with us will be a benefit for the site, but that is not what I'm talking about here. I heard Phil mention on that Poker podcast that they would be looking to add nosebleed stakes, perhaps even before they get to MTTs. And I think that could be an important draw. Now, there's a lot of drawbacks of having nosebleed stakes for an operator, but when you are an up-and-comer, I think you need to take some chances, and I think that's one chance that could end up with a lot of high visibility and could draw players to the site, get them aware of the site, get them playing on the site, get them definitely railing, and I'll be interested to see how they pull that off, what kind of games they have, what kind of high stakes players will be playing on the site, and the indication is that could be coming in 2020 relatively soon, I would imagine.
Well, it's interesting because I know when he was, I think pre-launch, he was talking about plans for the site, and high stakes tables were always there in the plan, and they always involved doing something a bit different. Like, I want to even say he suggested that he would allow HUDs at high stakes, or there was some slight change, because the problem he's got is with Run It Once is that it does not lend itself to a Railbirds product, right? They're by default anonymous tables. There's not even hand history, so you can't be like posting and sharing like really sick hands. And the anonymous thing, other than Phil Galfond has his own real name now, it really doesn't work at all. So obviously the model that they have will have to change if they want to kind of tap into that, I think. And there definitely was
just to correct you on HUDs, one thing quick, Nick. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they do have downloadable hand histories now. That was a feature that was added.
But not if you're observing the table.
Right. So only the players can post them themselves. Yeah, true.
Yeah, exactly. And a big thing about railing these hands is that you can see these sick hands and like copy and paste the hands and share them with friends and stuff. I mean, people will stream it, and Doug Polk will be able, and Joey will be able to do videos about it and stuff. But the product definitely, I think, needs to be altered, and I think that again that is something that Phil has said going back a long time, is that they would have a slightly different experience for like the nosebleed games.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like that's too far out of their capability. We saw it happen, as you mentioned, when Phil himself started playing on the site. They made him be not anonymous. I think that, getting everyone their own avatars, if you had a Phil Ivey, people would start showing up. Patrick Antonius, a lot of the big old school names perhaps would be a bigger draw than maybe some of the big online killers. But I think it's a good idea. I'd like to see it happen, and I think it could pay off big.
I think we're going to have to talk about bots, Mike. I had hoped that we could avoid the subject entirely, but there's just been too much going on in the last week that it would be remiss of us not to try and tackle the topic.
All right. There's all kinds of bots all over the place, and I don't mean that they're running rampant. I just mean their bots are an interesting topic in today's world, and especially when looking in online poker.
So here are the things that happen in a bullet point form, and then you can choose what you want to dive into.
Okay.
So obviously the big thing is I say the big thing. A thing that kind of maybe set this conversation going was a week ago. Morgan Stanley issued, I guess, kind of an investor's note where they had reduced price targets, broadly speaking, reduced their optimism of three companies, specifically the Stars Group, GBC and Playtech, prompted by basically when 2 months ago an online poker bot run by I think it was Facebook's AI team, Pluribus, reported that they had created like a human beating 6-max no limit hold'em bot, and Morgan Stanley said that this specifically showed that bots were a huge problem in online poker. There was, operators faced a constant battle. It was now a question of when, not if, these bots would dampen the draw of online poker, and therefore they were, reducing price targets on these three companies. We had that. We had then a couple of days later Poker Snowy, who produce what they say a human beating bot. It's a piece of trading software that you can use to analyze your play, get advice on your play. It's been around for like 3 years.
Former sponsor of Pokerfuse.
Oh yeah, you're being very good on your disclosures this episode, Mike. Yeah, they were for responsible. Yeah, going back like 3 years or so. This company, dates back like decades plus because they're pretty big in the backgammon world. Actually, they wrote the original human beating backgammon bot, I think. But anyway, that's so they released a big PR saying, basically questioning the whole original Facebook press release about this was the first ever bot. Obviously, they say that they have software that has been able to beat humans in 6-max big bet games for a long time, etc., etc., etc. Then that seemed to, maybe it's just a coincidence, but we saw a couple of days ago MPN decide to release data on the last 2.5-3 years of game integrity efforts they've made to police their games and close bot accounts. This also comes after Party Poker started doing this a few months ago. We have 8-9 months of data, and in fact Party Poker released another month's worth of data, I think today or yesterday. So now we have two big operators releasing information about bots. There we go. I think that's all the main bullet points about bots in the last week. Mike,
okay.
What would you like to dive into from that?
So one of those definitely jumps out at me as being a bit more interesting than the others, and that's the MPN one. I haven't had a chance to read what they put out, and I'm curious what their data has shown.
So they released quite different data to what Party Poker have released. A bit more information. So what Party Poker have done is they've just released the number of accounts closed and the amount of money seized every month dating back to last December. They split it between their .com and .eu networks, and they previously but have stopped. They released how much of these closures were due to purely their own internal efforts and what percentage were due to reports from other players prompting them to investigate.
And they stopped after MPN, the hand histories went away, is that correct?
Yes, I think you're correct, yeah.
Okay.
So MPN this week released data going back to January 2016. Every single month, they released relative figures on the percentage of players who were investigated. So across all their monthly active users, what percentage did they investigate? What percentage did they close? And then the absolute figures on the amount of money seized and returned to players that month.
Do you have any of those figures handy?
I have all of them, yeah.
Oh,
and they also have a monthly figure for what percentage. I can't remember what they had. They came up with a really nice term for it, but basically, here it is. Their proactive detection ratio. So this was the number of accounts they closed entirely by their own integrity team. So like Party Poker's figure. So yes, they released all of that information. What would you like to know?
Wow. So I'd like that last figure. Their integrity figure would be interesting.
Okay, well, I'm going to make you guess all these numbers, obviously,
all right,
as we do on the podcast. So, broadly speaking, over the last 3 years, what percentage do you think MPN, what is their proactive detection ratio, what percentage was entirely due to their game integrity team?
So this is the number of total bots that were attributed just to internal detection, correct?
As a percentage, yeah.
Yeah. I would say 79.
It was actually 98.
98, that's quite high.
And in the last year, it's close to 99%. Is entirely jive.
Yeah, let's back up a bit because I think there's one thing that may be skewing that number. MPN didn't have hand histories for a majority of that time. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
No, I thought they just recently went back to offering hand histories.
So their original client, which is still live in some places, has always had hand histories. Their Prima client, which was released maybe a year ago, stopped, but that was optional for a very long time, and they have since added it back in. Although that is a good point, I don't think there's a dip in that figure during the time when they released the Prima client. But yeah, so they're as high as 99%. To compare, Party Poker is more like 75%.
Wow.
And that, from what I can see, is a directly comparable figure. They seem to be reporting the same thing. So MPN is definitely claiming here that they are catching a lot more than... Again, we've talked about this before.
Or players are reporting a lot less.
Exactly. So we could say, like, maybe Party Poker's got loads more people who are proactively reporting them. Maybe I don't want to suppose, but I mean, you take it on face value. MPN is definitely saying with this figure, like, we 99% we catch before anyone's even told us about them. But I think the numbers get more interesting. It would be interesting to see how closely... Have you really not looked at these numbers at all, Mike?
I have not at all.
Okay. So what percentage of all... So monthly players, on a monthly basis, how many accounts, percentage, do they investigate?
What percentage of accounts did they investigate? Percentage of their total account?
Yeah. Percentage of total monthly active users are investigated for potentially cheating.
And this is by both player reports and internal. I would say 18.
Interesting. So do you think 18% of all players are investigated every month?
Is that high? I can't imagine it's low.
Oh, well, yes. Well, so the number is historically about 7.5%. In the last year, It's more like 10%. Which actually struck me as quite high. That on a monthly basis, 10% of all players are looked into. But I mean, again, if these looking into is mostly an automated system, and like one player giving it a 2-minute glance over some stats, it depends how thorough these investigations are. Anyway,
Right.
So the main figure: what percentage of monthly active users have their accounts closed due to fraudulent activity?
Wow, that's got to be pretty low. 1?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty much. Historically, it's 1.25%. The last year, it's down to 0.67%.
Do they attribute that to any particular reason?
So
Prima, perhaps?
one thing that jumps out in their numbers, a couple of things really, is they really improved they say they improved their game integrity systems about a year ago. And when they did that, when they implemented these things, they caught a huge bot ring and seized over 300,000 euros in 1 month. Ever since then, their investigation rates went from about 5% to about 10% of their player base. But their closure rates has got lower. So they are saying, since they've improved these processes, they've scared away basically a lot of bots. They said up until this point, bot operators might have been lax and left around, obviously hundreds of thousands of euros in their accounts. Since we've been much more proactive, they're basically implying operators are much more scared to be leaving much money around. It's much harder to operate on our network. So they're definitely putting out these figures because they're proud of them, no doubt about that. They think they look good against Party Poker's numbers. Now, so they reported about €1 million in total refunded over this period of 3 years. It roughly works out about 25,000 euros a month over this time period. Now, Party Poker reports close to about $120,000 a month, but Party Poker is 4, 5, maybe 6 times larger than MPN. So they roughly work out, like they're in the same order of magnitude at least, of how much they're both seizing in proportion to their network size. MPN might be fractionally more, might be about the same. So they're both talking in the same kind of terms, but MPN is definitely saying that we're catching almost all of them ourselves. Our numbers have gone down. Here's 3 years worth of data. So transparency levels have increased. We've talked before, Party Poker, very commendable what they've done. I feel like MPN have upped the stakes even more here and saying this is what we're doing. We've said before we'd love to see other operators do this. We've talked before about some of the problems with Party Poker's numbers and the implications and drawing conclusions. I feel MPN directly addressed some of these things. I think their data set is fascinating. Would love to see that from Party Poker and from other operators as well.
So on the topic of bots, one of the things that we're seeing here is we're comparing what one site does to what another site does, and how many accounts they catch, how much dollars or how much money that they confiscate. And taking us a bit back to the last segment, listening to Phil on the Dat Poker podcast, he was talking specifically about their strategy for catching bots. And something really jumped out at me when listening to you talk about MPN and Party. Once's approach is step one is annoyance. Make it difficult for bots to operate on the platform. And their step 2 is prevention through detection, as Phil stated. If they're very successful at step 1, it's going to be hard then to compare if they were ever to start releasing the numbers of bots that they've caught or the money that they've confiscated. It's going to make those numbers hard to compare across the board. So that strikes me as, maybe there's certain aspects of each software platform that makes it more susceptible to bots or makes it harder for them to operate.
Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. They obviously have the advantage of building something from the ground up with that in mind. I think, it's easy to talk when ultimately you're a very small operator, and so you're going to be flying under the radar quite a bit. And it's definitely, there's an aspect of running online poker room where it's kind of, you don't have to outrun the line, you just have to outrun your friend. In that,
right.
You don't have to be impossible to run a bot on, you just have to be much more difficult than a much larger, more blasé site where you can just fly under the radar and do your thing. And so as long as Run It Once does better than other people, they're going to be well ahead of the game. Absolutely. So there's absolutely an aspect of that. So we should probably just touch on very briefly, or maybe we don't have to, the Morgan Stanley opinion regarding the Facebook bot and how that meant the death to online poker. Do you feel like
I think we should. Yeah. And before we wrap up, I have kind of a side note about bots too that I'd like to raise and get your opinion on. But let's talk about the Morgan Stanley stuff, because it looks like it's gotten picked up by mainstream news. It's getting a lot of attention. I think that.
So that I want to circle back to, because I think that's perhaps the most interesting thing. The thing is, so it's a very detailed report. Some of it I don't agree with, but broadly speaking, there's a lot that's not that contentious. They're saying that there's advances in AI. It shows that there's absolutely products out there, at least this in an academic sense, that can beat even very good players at online poker, that there is a constant battle of operators both combating that and combating the perception of it, and that's all very true. The only question is whether there was a big watershed moment, a big thing, this thing happened, and therefore the whole situation's changed. So from my perspective, that's always been the case. And that under an academic setting, a poker bot can now do X, Y, and Z really doesn't change the situation on the ground, which is bots have been running on these sites since NPN January 2016. They were catching bots. They don't have to be beating world-class players. That's fairly irrelevant to both the perception of bots and the reality of bots on sites. So I feel like this should have been baked into anyone's price of the STARS group, for example, is right. Understanding that this is a known risk and a constant battle. It is literally written in the annual reports of these companies in their risks and uncertainty section about bots and the perception of bots.
I suspect that even though AI has been advancing, that perhaps the detection methods by the sites has advanced more rapidly over the past, say, 2 years than AI has. Bots have been around for a long time, and detection has always been there, but there's always been that, hey, are they letting these bots operate on the platform because it's generating more rake? But since it's become more visible and become more of maybe a PR liability, I think we've seen more operators come out talking about bots and perhaps even increasing their detection methods at maybe what could be a faster rate than the advancement of the actual bots that play on the sites.
Exactly. I think a better metric, if you were to measure how much of a concern bots should be, it wouldn't be whether in a lab test whether an AI group have built a DeepMind-like bot to beat Chris Jesus Ferguson. It was literally him and 4 other people. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is how are efforts ongoing to evade detection, and what are the efforts by operators to catch cheaters. So there's lots of things still in the arsenal of operators that could be used, from forcing webcams and voice activation. We even had like the Party Poker guys on this podcast talking about that. That seems rather fanciful, but there's a lot that could still be done. I absolutely would say that operators have stepped up their game in its methods. I am not suggesting that the problem is solved and moving in that direction, but I do not think that this Facebook pluribus thing 2 months ago changed the reality of the situation one bit. We've had court cases in Sweden about bot operators caught. We've had huge PLO, mid-stakes PLO rings caught on PokerStars 3 or 4 years ago. I think I'm going roughly off the back of my hand here. We had bots at the Espresso tournaments in Winamax 2 years ago and court cases around that. Like, this is not a new thing. It's really surprised me. And this comes back to your first point, which is this thing got picked up a lot in mainstream media. It's this investors note itself seems to create more of a negative perception problem than it was. It's almost self-fulfilling. It was foretelling something that its own investors note was saying, which I imagine is fairly common with these public investors notes. But I don't know. The thing is, everything they write in it is true. It was a very useful piece of information for someone to understand the threat to the industry. It's very relevant. I just think it's
incomplete.
It's talking on a moving target which has been around for years, not like this thing happened and now online poker is dead. So something else I saw written on this was, let's look at like online, like backgammon. That's actually a good example, talking Poker Snowy. You never get real money backgammon online because the bots have always been really good. I don't think that's why you don't get real money backgammon online. You don't get real money cash game backgammon live, do you? You do not. There's not the world's. I mean, there are some backgammon tournaments. They're mostly for hobbyists. There are a couple of professionals and a few hustlers around, but you do not get huge backgammon clubs in London because. And it's the same with chess. And it's not because they could have a bot with them. It's because no one wants to play backgammon for cash. It's probably too skill heavy. It's probably one reason. And it's just not popular. Where live poker is absolutely massive. So I don't really think it's, primarily due to the risk of bots. It's that no one wants to do it. Online poker has had bots for years. They've been real for years. And it is a constant battle, and that absolutely should be a consideration if you're an investor in an online poker company. I just feel that this was weirdly timed and weirdly tied into something of a non-event.
Yeah, well, tangentially related, another, I guess, potential risk to the online poker industry that bots pose, and I'd like your opinion on this, is I've seen a lot of chatter lately about iGaming moving into customer service bots. And it just strikes me that online poker companies are so notoriously bad at customer service to begin with. To automate that process with a bot is just going to turn off customers even more, in my opinion. I was curious to know what your thoughts on it were, and if you had seen any or heard any chatter about any of the online poker operators implementing bot customer service as part of their platform.
I haven't done. So is that, presumably that will work like a live chat thing?
Correct.
On a website?
Yes. I mean, they already have a problem with canned spam email responses. I can't imagine that having that happen in real time in a chat box is going to make people satisfied and want to play on those sites.
I can't disagree with you there.
All right. Well, I was just curious if you had heard any news on it. It's been I've seen it even outside of the gaming industry. It's starting to gain a lot of steam and popularity, and I don't know. I see it as a train wreck or a disaster waiting to happen if that's ever implemented into online poker.
Well, the bots are taking over the world, Mike. It's inevitable, isn't it? They're going to take everyone's jobs.
They're going to be doing podcasts soon.
That'd be fantastic. Take Thursday afternoons off. That'd be great.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Pokerfuse podcast. As a reminder, please give us a like and a subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us and interact with us on Twitter. Nick is at PokerProJones. I'm at SpookyBugs. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.